I'm focused on, I'm going back to the Congo in February. But yeah, really focused on raising money and sustaining the work. My mission, or the mission of the organization that I co-founded, is to protect the bonobos and their habitat in the Congo Basin. And we work exclusively with the local communities in the habitat. And through doing that, we devised our vision together for the Bonobo Peace Forest, which is a linked network of community-managed nature reserves that are supported by sustainable development. And so over these past, well, since we could actually get into the habitat, our organization is 20 years old this year, but we could get on the ground in 2002. We just work in partnership, and it's evolved very organically in making agreements with local communities to protect the bonobos. I mean, first we were just trying to find them, and rather than going and doing just biological surveys, we began with a process we called information exchange, which is kind of a variant of participatory rural appraisal. But basically, the premise is that we do not work in a top-down way. We work in an exchange way of learning. Those people who share the forest with bonobos know the forest the best. And when we were doing surveys trying to find where are the bonobos existing in viable numbers to protect them, it was like almost a tabula rasa when we got started. There were just a few research sites and some anecdotal data and stuff like that. And the way we did it, besides studying, maps and where viable habitat would be, was basically through networking with the local people. And we had, we had 100% success rate, and discovered bonobos in 12 important regions, and started really working in some of those sites with those local communities. Kokolo Puri is really the pilot and the place where we've done the most. And that, our experience there, and a lot of this is thanks, in fact, everything is thanks to an amazing local leader there, Albert Locasola, who, grew up in part in Kokolo Puri and had, and then went and got educated in cities and came back to help his community. And so, he was the great communicator between the expats and the people. And of course, BCI in my organization, Bonobo Conservation Initiative in the Congo, is 100% Congolese. So, and we have really emphasized training and building capacity of Congolese people rather than importing expatriate scientists to do surveys. We've trained Congolese scientists to do surveys, and a variety of other work. Even the information exchange and doing focus groups and taking both quantitative and qualitative data to understand but a lot of the process that we've dealt with is simply by talking and having meetings with representatives of the communities about what their needs are. So in the process of creating the Kokolo-Puri Bonobo Reserve, we responded to the requests of the people for health clinic, for an institute of higher learning, and we did co-found a college that is, it's chugging along. It's sort of the little engine that could, but it's growing, and another group has now come in to help build that, strengthen the college. But it was accredited, and it's, graduates up to 100 people a year at this point. But that's been slow, and agricultural help. Their staple crop, cassava, had gotten this horrible disease called mosaic disease, and people were getting malnourished as a consequence. So we partnered with an agricultural nonprofit and got, disease-resistant cassava, trained agronomist, who then, helped grow production fields in the community, and then Kokolo-Puri then shared it with neighboring communities, so the production field, and that had an impact on the entire region, which was suffering. And so those are linked with bonobo and protecting bonobos. And we've even had a village elder one time said, in one of these meetings, he said, "See, our ancestors are right. The bonobo helped them, and now the bonobo is helping us." I majored in psychology in college, and I was fascinated with, what it means to be human. I actually got disillusioned with Western psychology at Williams and studied a lot of religion and anthropology and other disciplines because, I just found what I was learning in Western psychology didn't answer my questions. And, but I was still fascinated, with humanity, and the apes were always something that I found fascinating, but I never really learned that much about them. So fast forward to 1992, I was working as a copywriter at National Geographic, and I was assigned to work on a book about the great apes. And I was just completely captivated, and I read, Diane Fossey's work and Jane Goodall, and got to meet Jane Goodall and George Schaller and all these wonderful minds. But of course, I knew about the three great apes: chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans. But then here is this fourth great ape, the bonobo, that is so different from chimpanzees in the most fascinating and important ways. I really found my holy grail. I found my calling, to find an ape that was matriarchal, had this, peaceful, cooperative society, and the sexuality of bonobos was, fascinating to me, and so important for humans, that here you have an ape that is essentially bisexual, and, what does that mean about what it means, what's normal for humans? So bonobos kind of represented qualities that I personally, aspire to, peace, the hippie values of peace, love, cooperation, free love, all those good things, but I think that for humans, and looking at them compared to chimps, it's really like looking at the yin and yang of human nature. The male and female paradigm are exemplified so beautifully in these two species. So for us to really have a full understanding of who we are and where we came from, it's really important for humans to know about bonobos. So basically, I quit my job and decided to follow bonobos, with the idea of writing about them and bringing the story back to National Geographic. So I supported my bonobo habit by freelance writing for several years, and during that time at Nat Geo, I met Sue. And Mary Smith, there were a couple of longtime editors at National Geographic magazine who really took me under their wing and encouraged me. And one of them was Mary Smith, who shepherded Louis Leakey's ape ladies. And she connected me with Sue and gave me a good reference. And so Sue opened her door to me. And that summer, I volunteered all summer at Sue's lab at Georgia State. And we just clicked right off the bat. And Sue allowed me access. You know, I got to have direct contact with the bonobos and just lived and breathed, you know, everything at the lab, and with Sue and Dwayne, who were amazing teachers. So I was completely hooked after that, of getting to really know a bonobo and be with them and have intimate and, you know, communicate and talk with a bonobo. It was amazing. And that was 1993, and Pan Benicia was young. I think she was 6, maybe. She would ride on your back, and so my first experiences having direct contact was with Pan Benicia. And going out in the woods, you know, they had devised a system of trails, and the bonobos could say what they wanted, where they wanted to go, and what they wanted to eat at these different sites in the forest that Sue had set up. It was kind of mimicking the natural habitat of bonobos, where they naturally forage through the forest for different foods every day. And so in this way, the captive bonobos could choose, oh, I want to go to Treehouse and eat jelly beans or whatever it was at the time. And so I'd go out with Pan Benicia, and she'd ride on my back, and sometimes wanted to ride, sometimes wanted to walk, and it was amazing. And some of those, you know, some of the experiences that stand out in my head the most are, one time we were playing hide and go seek, and so Pan Benicia and I went and hid together, and she led me, you know, and we went and hid down on a sort of a bank of a creek, you know. And when we're hiding, you know, we're huddled down, and she's looking in my eyes, and, you know, and I felt just like I used to feel as a kid, you know, hiding in the woods and doing secret things. And, you know, there was just this amazing intimacy. And the researcher on the prowl was, you know, Pan Benicia, where are you? And she's, you know, we're looking at each other and holding hands, and, you know, and it was like being with a person, with a friend. And I remember, you know, being groomed by her. She was, you know, she would inspect you, and I had some kind of little cut on my arm or something, and she, you know, wanted to understand it, and then she hit on the keyboard, bad, you know, hurt, bad. And I said, no, it's not. That hurt is not bad. It's fine. But she, you know, inspected it and kissed it, sort of, and then she took a twig and made like a sharp end to it. She bit off the end of a twig, and then she gave me a manicure, basically. She traced under each fingernail, and then she proceeded to bite all my fingernails off. You know, just a finishing touch. But it was so, you know, just so intimate. You know, and inspect, you know, your face and look in your eye, you know, just being groomed by a bonobo. And of course, I would try to groom her too. So that was just an amazing experience. You know, I was also just passionate about conservation and what was happening with all the great apes. And at that time, Sue was part of the very first fledgling, you know, group of scientists who made the Bonobo Protection Fund. And so Sue and Dr. Kano, the premier researcher who studied bonobos in the wild since the mid-70s, he started his wild studies about the exact same time that Sue started her captive studies. They made the Bonobo Protection Fund. And so I volunteered for that and raised over $100,000 for it and, joined the board and whatever. But through, getting involved with whatever we could do together, because I really had been my experience at the lab was to be a participant observer. My goal was to write about them and raise awareness about bonobos at first. And I didn't really know, because I got so involved in every way that I didn't really know where that was going to lead, in my life. But anyway, we had an opportunity to go to Zaire with Dr. Fiorucci, a Japanese scientist, in 1994. And so Sue and I went with him and stayed for 3 months in Wamba. And before we went, Dr. Fiorucci said, "You have to learn Lingala." And that was the best, in my entire career with bonobos, was the best thing I ever did. But it was, difficult. How are you going to learn Lingala? So, because I searched in Washington where I lived, and, there were no classes at the agriculture department. They have classes in lots of languages. But phone call to phone call, I was finally led to this anthropologist at the Library of Congress who had grown up in the bonobo habitat in Equateur and went on to do his anthropological fieldwork in central Congo. And so he agreed to teach me. Anyway, so I started studying before we went on that trip. And then every day in the village, I had kids doing Lingala class with me. And that's when I started researching the indigenous legends about bonobos, which I've continued since that time. So we went every morning into the forest with the bonobos. And at that time, they were still provisioning bonobos at Wamba. So it was a feeding site, sort of a clearing that Dr. Kano had made, and they would put sugar cane or pineapple there. There was a film crew from NHK TV also. So it was kind of a lot of people, and the film crew got, first dibs on sightings and things. But still, it was just amazing to see the bonobos in the wild, and how they, just everything, how they move, just following them, of course, is not easy. They travel very quickly in the forest and a lot faster than humans, whether they're brachiating through the trees, and they're just so graceful and acrobatic, and it's delightful to watch them travel, and the way they grab a branch and let it bring them down if they're coming down to the ground. And then on the ground, they travel quickly in their own trails, but much faster than people can, and they can navigate through the dense undergrowth, so much easier than we can. We have to have machetes to follow them, because it's not easy, really, to observe bonobos in the wild. A lot of times they're high in the trees. I mean, that was the beauty of the benefit of the provisioning, that Dr. Kano was able to understand the social relationships by being able to see the bonobos so up close and see how they were interacting with each other. And now they don't provision bonobos at Wamba, and they still, they're very habituated, and they're doing great research there still. Of course, fascination with their sexual activity, and there was a lot of that because of the food provisioning. Bonobos tend to have sex when they're going to eat some wonderful food, or just ate it, or sharing it. And it's, delightful to watch how they do share food, and how the mothers give the food to the baby and sometimes chew some of it and then put it in the baby's mouth. But the female Gigi rubbing is the most prevalent kind of sex that you see. But there's also just a quality, there's an energy about the bonobos. So when you're with them, I don't know how to describe it, but you can just feel their, like, energy field or something. And it's peaceful. I mean, that's another thing that over the years in my work since, directing work and setting up new conservation sites and research sites, that the bonobos are really sensitive to us. It's a real give and take. So and they're as fascinated with us as we are with them. And I realized, you get up really early in the morning, pre-dawn, depends on where they slept the night before, how far you have to walk at 3 or 4 in the morning to get to them under their night nest. And, and at some point I realized, well, for God's sakes, why don't we take some coffee and something to eat? Because sometimes you get out there and they're under the night nest and you wait. So might as well have some coffee and make ourselves comfortable. And when we did that, the bonobos, of course, they love food sharing. And I've noticed this with orphans that we've rescued too. So they love to see people together, happy, eating food together. And so just doing that, the bonobos would come to us. So instead of us looking for them, they were so interested that they come to us. And they're very sensitive to our energy and our demeanor. Just in the wild, I really remember one time when we brought some of our other Congolese partners from other areas, other sites that they have made their own conservation associations with their communities, but they came to Kokolo Puri, where we have habituated bonobos. So even though they have bonobos in their forests, it's not very easy to see them. It takes years to habituate bonobos to human presence. And so this one guy, Anatol, came in the forest with us to see the bonobos at Kokolo Puri, and he was so excited, and just the excitement and the good vibe that we had, the bonobos it was just like this happy party, they were coming close to us, and he was so just exuding delight. And there was this and of course the young bonobos and the juveniles they're a lot more curious. The adults are more cautious with humans. This one juvenile male almost dropped right down into our group, until his mother came and snatched him away. But he was, dangling from a branch that was really, really close, and he was, it was just, I think, reacting to our playful, happy vibe that day. And by contrast, one time we brought a journalist in from Time magazine who had just come off of the Iraq war. And I think, and the guy was really over 6 feet tall. And, I think he was carrying trauma from what he had just experienced in Iraq. And he was wearing a bright red shirt. And that day, the bonobos did not, it was just, I think, the energy that was also, it's kind of that male-female dichotomy, I guess, or energy, that if you're, female energy is more receptive, talking paradigms, and male is more aggressive and directed out. And so, about getting something, getting the observation, getting the photograph, and that was kind of energy that was coming out that day with this journalist. And he was a wonderful guy, wrote a great article, but it was too bad because the bonobos, he didn't get to see and observe as well because they just were not receptive. They took off. They found it was kind of too aggressive energy that day. And they're just really sensitive to body language, and of course they use eye contact a lot. And that's been interesting, locking eyes and having nonverbal but yet intimate bond or communication of some sort with even wild bonobos.
Would you describe a little more kind of eye contact that you can make with wild bonobos?
Well, it's, they have to be close enough to really be able to do it that way. But I have had some experiences like that. And one, not too long ago, a couple of years ago, there was, we were following bonobos at Kokolo Paris, and there was a female that I just was connecting with. And she went down on the ground, and I kind of left the trackers and was kind of following where she was going. And she was down on the ground, and I was down on the ground, and I was almost lying down on the forest floor because there was low brush, but there was almost like a tunnel where we could see each other. And I guess she was, maybe 2 or 3 yards away from me. So it was close to where we could see each other's eyes, and we were kind of in this kind of tunnel. And I really almost felt like she might come see me, but there was come to me. We just had we locked eyes, and they're just a intimate connection that I was having with her. And I don't really know. I don't know. I probably wrote about it, but just it's just intimate and curious, but there was a trust. I guess that's the thing, that I felt that there was a trust, because the bonobos, even though they're habituated, they still are cautious with people. So it felt like a breakdown of that, and like there was like a connection, and more than the eyes, kind of heart, body, I don't know. And of course, I felt a lot of love, really. It's kind of the energy that I was feeling toward her. And like privileged, to, I don't know, to be in her world kind of thing. I felt deferential, sort of. But anyway, it was just this moment, I don't know how long we were there. It wasn't that long. And then a tracker came. And so she went away. Well, I do think it's true that captive bonobos probably engage in sex more often than wild bonobos, simply because they're bored to tears and they don't have anything else to do. So, and it feels good, and why not? But bonobos in the wild actually have quite a lot to do every day. They forage. I mean, generally what we see is, they wake up in their night nest, and yes, sometimes there is some sexual activity. They pee like we do, and that's the sign that they're waking up. You start golden rain from the treetops. But then, they forage for different foods throughout the day. They also usually take a siesta and take a rest during the day. It depends on what's available in the forest, where they go, and how difficult it is to get what they need each day. So they're not having sex all the time. They have a lot of work to do, But I really take, I don't agree with, well, I think it's, well, I don't agree that that bonobos just have sex to mitigate conflict. That's how a lot of the scientific language that's been used, like and you know, and it's true that bonobos, if there is some kind of a conflict over food, and of course you see that more in captivity also, where bonobos, you know, the food is the object of attention, but in the wild, you know, there's generally enough to go around, and there are, like, we've seen group encounters which is really interesting, and that's something that is being studied at the site in Kokolo, Paris, where we now have 4 groups of bonobos that are meeting and interacting, which has never been really well studied in the wild. So it's really interesting. And sometimes, if there's a really, you know, valued fruit tree and 2 groups of bonobos meet, there has been some competition, and usually it's between the males. So that's the more violent kind of almost fighting that you can see sometimes, and often it is resolved with sex at the end. And in these group encounters too, the groups, they're having a lot more sex. When the groups get together, it's like meeting old friends, and a lot of Gigi rubbing between females, and even with male female and male male. I'm probably digressing, but I also see that, you know, bonobos have sex. They're just grooming. They're hanging out in the tree. There's nothing going on in terms of any conflict of any kind, and they have sex. So it feels good, you know, and it's bonding. You know, it's a way of sharing energy and good feeling with another individual. You know, so, you know, to say that it's only used to mitigate conflict is just, I think, not really what's going on. It's obvious that they're having orgasms, and that's, you know, we all know what that feels like. That's a pretty nice thing to experience. And I mean, I think there's even been question, are they actually having an orgasm? But it seems to me they are. You know, there's definitely a climax that occurs. I mean, it's much quicker than human sex, you know, that it's fast, you know, both female female and male female and male male. The male male is not observed as much, but it definitely takes place. There hasn't been enough research on their vocalizations, but just being out there with them and seeing how they move, you know, how they coordinate with each other, it's just, I find it hard to believe that they're communicating all of that verbally, because they don't vocalize all that much. Now, I don't know. I'm just hypothesizing, because I've had, you know, I think I told you all also a story the other day about how the bonobos led us directly to the research site for Martin. And it was just strange, because, you know, we had made the plan that we were, just the way that entire day with the bonobos unfolded, that they were so slow and moving, and that they then, you know, granted this very long, you know, very close-up viewing session while they were grooming, and then they led us directly to the site that we had been just planning to go visit that day to set up the research camp. And they hadn't gone anywhere near that place that entire time that we'd been there. And it's just,
Where had you made the plans?
we had made the plans with, you know, in the village, but also talking with the trackers, you know, probably we were talking about it the day before, you know, while we're out in the forest following the bonobos. I mean, I don't think they can understand English, I'm sure, you know, or Lingala, actually, in that case, we were speaking Lingala. I don't know, it's just uncanny, but the head tracker, who is a very kind of mystical guy, and he, you know, he can always find the bonobos. And they're, you know, you lose them. They're not easy to track. And sometimes, and Leonard, who just seems to have a special affinity with them. Can always find them. And I could never do that, you know, I mean, but he just kind of have a sixth sense about the bonobos. And so when that happened and they let us straight, I mean, it just seemed like a sign, you know, that yes, the bonobos wanted Martin to come, but maybe it just could have been a coincidence. Some of we've rescued a lot of orphan bonobos, and I personally have taken care of 3, like living with them day and night and becoming their surrogate mother for a period of time. And, you know, and the little babies, you know, you can tickle them. I mean, you see that with Sue Savage Rumbaugh's work, and tickle them, they laugh, you know. Our team has rescued over 20 between our staff and our partners, which is sad because for every bonobo orphan that you rescue, at least one was killed. But there was one that we named Iboko because she came from a place called Iboko. And we were in our office in Bondica. It's kind of a crossroads on the Congo River, and you know, crossroads for the bushmeat trade, among other trade. And we had, our office has kind of a balcony looking over a street, and we saw this guy riding down the street on a bicycle with a bonobo. And so our guys, you know, tore out after him and went and got the police, and we were able to confiscate this baby. And she was, you know, it was so sad. I mean, she was so dehydrated, and the guy was eating a popsicle, like a frozen thing. She wanted it, and he wouldn't share it with her because it took us a while to get her off his person and into our care, because we had to have the police help, you know, help us. Which is, you know, we've learned a lot through these things, because the hunters don't actually know that it's against the law to hunt bonobos a lot of times, you know, and that's part of our work, is to raise awareness. And even the police force didn't know it was against the law when we first started. They didn't know bonobos were endemic to their country, and they didn't know that they were, you know, endangered and protected by international and their own national laws. So anyway, but Iboko, she was just, you know, this poor little baby, and she was dehydrated, and she was scared, and, you know, finally getting her and just holding her and trying to feed her. You know, we got oranges and, you know, different fruits, but she was so thirsty that we tried to get fluid into her at first. And then we really bonded. I was with her for a week in Bondica before we could fly her back to Kinshasa, to the sanctuary. And just like a bonobo, you know, in the wild, she clung to me all the time. You know, babies are always clinging to their mothers. And so, you know, we ate together, and we tried to, you know, feed her different foods, and of course we got a baby bottle and we're giving her milk, and she was curious, you know, as she started regaining her strength and feeling more comfortable, she was more playful, and but, you know, she peed all over me a lot. I mean, that happened. But bathing together, and, you know, giving her a little bath, and sleeping together. And there is a picture, but I so remember this, where she was wrapped around my head, you know, and she was just about that long, and she curled up right like that. And it was, I mean, other people would take her sometimes too, so she wasn't always 100% on me, but most of the time. And just, it was really neat, you know, as we were, you know, getting her healthier physically, but also emotionally, and just a lot of love and grooming her. And but it was really telling, because the last day I had set, when we had to fly back to Kinshasa, I had set the alarm for 5 o'clock in the morning, and this is something I actually talk about in my talks a lot of times, because it's just metaphorical. But I'd set the alarm for 5 o'clock, and it was pitch black dark, and the alarm goes off, and I'm like, groping around for the alarm clock, and it's not where I put it. And finally, I find my flashlight, and I turn it on, and Iboko had grabbed the alarm clock, and she's like, inspecting, what is this weird thing making all this noise, and I'm kind of biting it, licking it, and I just, I thought that was ironic because the alarm is going off for her species. The time is running out. But it was so traumatizing to have to let her go. I really had bonded with her emotionally. I really loved her, and a friend of mine ran an airline, and so we rode in the cockpit all the way to Kinshasa, and she rode on my lap. And when we got her to the sanctuary, it was evening, and I had to let her go into a cage. She's going to sleep by herself, not with somebody. And it was hard. I mean, I really loved her. And you feel motherly, you feel like it's your child, because they're so human-like. She was so aware, and she had her own personality, everybody fell in love with her in Mbandaka, and we took her to the police. I mean, she was like a little ambassador too. We took her to educate people, and we had a lot of visitors coming to our office to see her. And she just had such a sweetness, and as she recovered, I don't know how to describe. Well, it was more that it wasn't just that she was needy and taking from us. It was like she was giving us something too. She was participating, and she was caring even, kind of. It's hard to describe that, but. And she did fine at the sanctuary for some years, but it was hard. I went and saw her one time. It was just too hard for me to see her. And I felt so bad leaving her, She integrated really well. She really did. I just, it was hard for me to go back and see her, partly because I felt guilty. I just felt like I couldn't describe, I was so sorry to have to leave her. I would have lived with her for the rest of my life if I could have,
And you couldn't tell her that, is that what you thought?
No, how do you just tell that? And it's better for her really to forget all about me and bond with other people that she'll be with, and other bonobos. But it was delightful. I mean, actually, I was so happy to see her healthy, and integrating in the group. They do a very good job there at Lolia Bonobo. They really.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the only sanctuary for bonobos. But then they had an epidemic of a respiratory disease, and she passed away a few years after that.
At the sanctuary?
Mm-hmm.
What is the kind of interaction you see between the indigenous populations and the bonobo populations when they share some parts of the same territory?
Well, my best experience, the places where I've spent the most time in the forest is in communities that actually have a taboo against hunting bonobos. And so that's very different than places that don't have the taboo, in which, and and especially in these places where our very presence and our work with those communities has helped to revive their ancestral traditions, which in some cases were breaking down. You know, when young people go to the city and see people eating apes, you know, at the bushmeat market, and just, you know, changing culture. So anyway, it's been a kind of symbiotic effect. But there's, you know, just a great respect for the bonobos, and they, you know, people in the forest respect them and also kind of have a real relationship with them, because there's some of the things the humans forage for food, and there's a lot of the similar foods that humans and bonobos both like to eat. And so there's kind of an understanding of kind of sharing, or who gets there first. I don't sense really like a competition, that the people are competing with the bonobos so much, but it's kind of a camaraderie, I guess, or, you know, that they're both looking for the same thing and eating from the same tree, and, like that. But yeah, you know, with the trackers that follow the bonobos, it's kind of like a family. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, here we are with our friends, the bonobos, you know. I mean, the trackers, you know, are excited, and they enjoy it too, you know, and they know the bonobos because they're the ones following them every day. They know them better than anyone. And so, you know, just talking about what so-and-so has been doing, or which bonobo is doing what. And I mean, the thing is that it's kind of like a presence. And I don't know enough. It'd be really interesting to study and learn more about the indigenous religious beliefs and their initiation and so on. But there's, you know, you get the sense that like the bonobos are sort of like, I don't know, sort of like benefactors or protectors or something of the people. I don't know how to describe that, but, you know, there's like an unspoken value that's kind of palpable in the way the people talk and feel about bonobos. You know, they're not just animals. They don't talk about bonobos like a diker or a bush pig or something else. They're, you know, they're special. They're conscious. And the relationship with the ancestors, because their religious beliefs, their traditions, you know, are very much about the ancestors and ancestor worship, and you know, the tradition to protect the bonobos, and these stories that have been handed down came from the ancestors. So it's a very deep, I'd say, respect and coexistence that exists. A man went on a long journey in the forest, and he walked a long time, and he ran out of food, and he was so tired that he fell down, weak from hunger. And a bonobo came along and saw this man, and he thought he was ill, and he wanted to help him. But once he, investigated, he realized, well, this guy is not actually sick. He's just hungry. So the bonobo went out in the forest and he collected some of his favorite food, like bea and bacau and bolingo and basenda, and he brought it back to the man. And the man ate the bonobo's food for the very first time, and he found it was really good. So to this day, people are still eating bea and bacau and bolingo and basenda. And people also have learned that they can cook those foods. They don't just eat them raw. But that is a true story, I think. and you see it because also the medicinal plants, bonobos and humans, there's some scientists also from Max Planck working at another site studying that, which is fascinating. One day, God called all the animals to come get a tail. And so the animals are in line to get their tail. And just when the bonobo was getting close to God, he got an itch on his back. And so he stood up and was scratching his back. And God looked at him and he said, well, you are not an animal. You cannot have a tail. You are a man.